So, have you ever loved the taste of something so much you just wished you could change one little thing about it? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating scientific quest to do exactly that. Take the caffeine out of Red Bull. This is the story of how a simple late-night craving turned into a pretty complex and, frankly, kind of wild chemical challenge.
And yeah, this is really where it all started. It's not about the energy boost. It's not about pulling an all-nighter. The whole reason for this entire project comes down to this one simple and, let's be real, kinda unusual preference for that weird chemical taste. This quote, right here, it basically sets the stage for everything that follows.
Okay, so here's the deal. A real love for the taste of Red Bull, but also a caffeine sensitivity that means drinking it any time after 4 p.m. is just not going to happen. The dream was simple enough. A caffeine-free version you can enjoy in the evening. But the chemistry to actually get there, yeah, not simple at all. So what's the first thing you do? You just ask, right? An email was sent off to Red Bull, and they actually got back surprisingly fast with a totally unsurprising and very firm no. So, with the official route slammed shut, the only option left was to take matters into their own hands and head to the lab. And this, right here, is the million-dollar question for this whole thing. It's not like just filtering out coffee grounds from water. You have to somehow selectively pull out just the caffeine molecules while leaving everything else behind, the sugar, the coloring, and especially those super secret artificial flavors. One wrong move and you could completely destroy the very taste that kicked this whole project off. All right, so knowing this was going to be a delicate operation, a plan was hatched using a process called solvent extraction. But here's the thing, even just on paper, the plan was just full of massive question marks. Success was absolutely not guaranteed before a single can was even cracked open. The idea was to use a solvent called dichloromethane, or DCM for short. See, caffeine actually likes DCM a lot more than it likes water, so in theory, it should just jump from the Red Bull over to the solvent. But there's a huge catch. Red Bull is really acidic, and that acidity could make the caffeine molecules want to cling to the water, which would stop the extraction dead in its tracks. To figure out just how stubborn that caffeine was going to be, you need to know a very specific number called its pKa. You can think of pKa as a little cheat code that tells you how a molecule is going to act when it's in an acidic or a basic solution. If you know the pKa of caffeine and the pH of Red Bull, you can actually calculate if this whole extraction is even possible. So we just need the pKa of caffeine. Simple, right? I mean, it's a super common chemical, you just look it up. Well, this is exactly where the first big, unexpected mystery popped up. It turns out finding that number was shockingly hard. The scientific literature was a complete and utter mess, with different sources giving wildly different values all over the place. But here's what it all boiled down to. If the true pKa was a low number, the extraction should work. If it was a high number, it was doomed to fail. There was just no way to know for sure without actually trying it. Oh, and if that wasn't enough to worry about, there's also this little problem. The ingredients list just says artificial flavors. What even are they? And are they, like caffeine, also more likely to dissolve in DCM? It was totally possible that the solvent would grab the caffeine and take all those secret flavor compounds right along with it, leaving behind nothing but a bland, colorless sugar water. So, with all these questions hanging in the air, there was really only one thing left to do. Get into the lab and just try it. The experiment started, the Red Bull was concentrated down to a syrup to make things a little easier, but then, a simple, almost reflexive action during a key step led to a complete and total disaster. Now, the process seems simple enough on paper. You concentrate the Red Bull, pour it into a special funnel, add the DCM solvent, and then you shake it. You shake it vigorously. That's standard practice, right? You want to mix the two liquids really well. But in this case, it turned out to be a project-ending mistake. And boom, this is what happened. Shaking it way too hard created an emulsion, basically a super stable, inseparable mixture. Think of it like mayonnaise. You can't unmake it. The two layers just would not separate, which made it completely impossible to drain off the solvent. This whole batch was ruined. It was time to start over from scratch. All right, take 2. For the second attempt, the technique had to change. Instead of that crazy vigorous shaking, the funnel was just gently rocked back and forth. Now, this method is a lot less efficient, but it was the only way to avoid making another batch of Red Bull mayonnaise. And the result?
a perfect, clean separation. The project was back on track. And this is where things get really interesting. After the layers separated on that second try, the bottom DCM layer was completely colorless, totally clear. This meant the solvent wasn't pulling out the dye that gives Red Bull its famous caramel color. And that was a fantastic sign. It gave some real hope that maybe, just maybe, the flavor molecules were also being left behind. Okay, so the extraction worked, but two huge questions were still on the table. First, did we actually pull out caffeine? And second, if we did, how much of it did we manage to get? It was time to isolate whatever was in that solvent and put it to the test. So, after evaporating all the DCM, we were left with this white powder. To identify it, a couple of classic chemistry tests were run, a melting point test and something called chromatography. And the results from both tests confirmed it. Yup, the extracted powder was, without a doubt, caffeine. But here's a weird thing. That isolated caffeine powder, it didn't really smell like anything you'd expect. It smelled exactly like Red Bull. And that was a little bit worrying. If the smell came out with the caffeine, did the flavor come out with it too? So, the big question, how much caffeine did they actually manage to pull out? Well, after weighing the powder and making some adjustments for impurities, the final number came in, a 24% reduction. Look, it's not completely caffeine-free, but hey, for a first attempt, that's a pretty significant result.
With the chemistry done and the numbers crunched, it was time for the ultimate test. That caffeine-reduced syrup had to be turned back into a drinkable soda to answer the one question that really mattered. Does it still taste like Red Bull?
The process was pretty straightforward. First, you got to use a vacuum pump to gently boil off any tiny traces of that DCM solvent. You definitely don't want to drink that. Then, you just add water back in to dilute the syrup to its original concentration. And for the final touch, a soda stream to bring back the fizz. And now, the moment of truth. Side by side with a can of regular Red Bull, the difference was just shocking. The original, bam, it hits you with that powerful, super distinct Red Bull smell. The homemade version, almost nothing, no smell at all. But then the taste. Whoa, the taste was nearly identical. And that was the big reveal, the huge discovery of this whole project. It turns out that in Red Bull, the aroma and the flavor are two totally separate components. The solvent pulled out the aromatic compounds right along with the caffeine, but it left the actual taste molecules behind. It's just a fascinating peek into how modern drinks are engineered. So in the end, you've got to call the project a success. It created a drinkable, good-tasting, caffeine-reduced Red Bull. But that 24% reduction still kind of hangs in the air, doesn't it? The ultimate goal is to get to 100% caffeine-free. This method didn't quite get there, which just begs the question, what other chemical tricks could you use to finish the job?